I used to believe that some hearts were just made for each other. You know that feeling? When someone looks at you and it's like they see right into the softest, most hidden parts of you. Not to judge, just to understand. That was him. He stepped into my life like morning light through an open curtain. Warm, quiet, unexpected. He remembered things I didn't even realize I'd said out loud. He once brought me sunflowers because, according to him, they looked like how I laughed. Who says things like that? He wasn't perfect. I mean, who is? But it felt real. He had this calm, magnetic energy, like he was always thinking 2 steps ahead, but never rushed. He worked a lot, always had some urgent meeting or late-night call, but still, he'd show up with my favorite tea or leave sticky notes on my mirror saying, "Just because." He'd hold my hand in public like he didn't care who saw, like he was proud of us. And I guess I started thinking, maybe this was it. Finally, someone who got me. I'd catch myself daydreaming, about what kind of ring he'd choose, if he'd ask me in the fall or the spring, whether we'd live in the city or find a quiet place just outside. It all felt like it was building towards something, steady, intentional, safe. There were tiny things that didn't quite add up, like the way he'd silence his phone when it buzzed after 10, or how I'd never met his friends, let alone his family. But love makes you soft. And softness makes you trust. I told myself he was just private, or that maybe he'd been hurt before. I made room for his shadows because I thought that's what love does. It waits, it forgives, it understands. So for his birthday, I planned something special, something that would show him how serious I was, how deep I'd already fallen. I just hoped he'd feel the same. I spent weeks getting it just right. I booked a little cabin 2 hours out of the city, somewhere quiet with a fireplace and thick pine trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. I imagined us slow dancing barefoot on old wooden floors, sipping wine, laughing about something that didn't matter. I bought him a gift too, nothing flashy, just something thoughtful. A leather-bound notebook. He always said he wanted to write more, if life ever slows down. I even had his initials engraved on the cover. The morning I left for the cabin, my heart was buzzing, like a champagne bottle just before it pops. I sent him a sweet, vague message. "I have a surprise. Pack light, wear layers." He didn't reply right away, but I figured he was busy. He always was. Still, by noon, the silence had started to gnaw at me, that low, creeping kind of anxiety, but I fought it off with logic. He was in meetings, or stuck in traffic, or maybe, he was just as nervous as I was. You know what's funny? I'd never been to his place. We always met at mine, or somewhere in between. I used to tease him about it, call it his man cave of mystery. He'd laugh and say, "Some secrets keep the magic alive." And I'd smile and let it go. But on that day, something pulled at me. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way my gut twisted in the pit of my stomach as the hours passed. So I changed course. I decided to stop by his apartment just to check in. Just to say, surprise. I imagined his face lighting up when he opened the door. I imagined him pulling me inside, grinning, kissing me like we hadn't seen each other in weeks. I clung to that image, tight. It kept the doubts quiet, kept the questions at bay, because in my heart, I still believed this was love, real love. And love, real or not, makes you brave in the strangest ways. When I pulled up to his building, I actually laughed out loud. My hands were shaking, and I laughed. Isn't that ridiculous? I told myself it was nerves, good nerves, birthday nerves. I had this whole dramatic entrance planned in my head like something out of a movie. I'd knock, he'd open the door, I'd say, "Happy birthday, baby," and we'd melt into each other like it was always meant to be. I even fixed my lipstick in the rearview mirror, smiled at my own reflection like a woman who believed in fairy tales. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Or maybe it was just my heartbeat thumping in my throat like it had something to warn me about. I clutched the little gift bag tighter, the ribbon cutting into my fingers just enough to ground me. Floor 6. His floor. I stepped out, heart thundering, shoes clicking on the tile like they were announcing me. I paused at his door, took a breath, and raised my hand to knock. But something stopped me. Voices. A woman's voice. And laughter. His. I froze. My first instinct wasn't suspicion. It was embarrassment. Like I'd walked in on something private I wasn't supposed to hear. I stepped back, suddenly unsure if I had the right door. But there it was, his last name, neatly printed on the mailbox. I stood there, heart in my throat, gift bag dangling like some foolish symbol of hope. And then the door opened. Just a crack. Just enough for me to see her silhouette, just enough to hear him call her babe. That's where it all shifted. But I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just stood there, silent, watching my perfect love start to splinter under the weight of something I couldn't name yet. Not then. I still thought, somehow, that this could all be explained. I still wanted to believe in him, in us. But deep down, something had started unraveling. And I didn't know it yet, but that thread would pull me somewhere darker than I'd ever been. I didn't knock. I didn't scream or cry or demand answers. I just turned and walked away, gift bag still clutched in my hand like a punchline to a joke only I didn't get. I got back in my car, pulled away from the curb, and drove with no direction. I don't even remember how long I drove, just that at some point the sun dipped low and the sky turned that soft bruised color that happens right before dark. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and let the wind slap my face like it was trying to wake me up. The next day, I told myself I needed clarity, not closure, not yet. Just the truth, raw and ugly, laid out where I could see it. So I went back. This time during the day, this time with less hope and more anger. The door was open, not wide, just enough. And on the counter inside I saw it. A photograph. Him. The same laugh I'd memorized. His arm wrapped around a woman I'd never met. And a child. A little boy with his eyes. That was the moment something inside me sank. Or maybe it snapped. He saw me before I could decide whether to leave or storm in. His eyes widened, not with guilt, but irritation. Like I was the one interrupting. I asked him one question. Who are they? His pause was all the answer I needed. He stepped outside, closed the door behind him like he was trying to keep his secrets in, and said it, flat, cold, like he was giving me directions instead of breaking my heart. She's my wife. He's my son. And just like that, the story I'd believed in, the love, the tenderness, the whispered promises, all of it collapsed. It wasn't real. None of it. I wasn't the love of his life. I was the secret, the thrill, the detour. And somehow, beneath the humiliation and heartbreak, something else stirred in me. Not sadness, not yet. Something sharper, something colder. I wasn't just broken. I was furious. I wish I could say I screamed, threw the notebook in his face, demanded justice. But I didn't. I stood there, blinking like I'd forgotten how to cry. He kept talking. Something about how it wasn't supposed to get this far. How I made him feel alive again. How he never meant to hurt anyone. I wasn't listening. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears like my body was trying to drown him out. He said he loved me, that he didn't love her, that he was trapped. I stared at him and thought, no, I was the one trapped. In your lie. I drove home in silence, the kind that buzzes inside your skull. I left the gift bag on the passenger seat like it might start talking, might explain something he never could. Everything started replaying in reverse. The canceled weekends, the vague texts, the moments that felt off, but I ignored. I kept thinking, how did I not see it? But I did. Somewhere deep down, I had. I just didn't want to look too closely. Because if you stare at a dream too long, you start to see the cracks. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the ceiling, wondering how many times he'd kissed me with her still on his lips, if he ever told her my name, if she ever found a blonde hair on his shirt and asked questions he dodged. The rage started to bloom. It didn't come in one loud explosion. It came in waves, cold, clean, and focused. I didn't want to burn his life down. Not yet. I wanted to understand the woman who stood next to him in that photo. The woman he lied to just as easily as he lied to me. So I found her. It wasn't hard. His last name, a quick search, a few scrolls. There she was, smiling at a charity event, a child on her hip, his arm around her waist. She looked good, not broken, not stupid, not like someone being lied to. And I thought, maybe she doesn't know. But then again, what if she does? And that thought lit something inside me I couldn't put out. I stared at her photos longer than I care to admit. Her smile, her clothes, the way her hand rested on his chest like it belonged there. I imagined their mornings, shared coffee, school runs, family dinners where he'd sit across from her like nothing was wrong, like I didn't exist. And that made me sick. Not because she won, but because none of us ever stood a chance. He didn't love either of us. He loved the game, the duality, the control. And I'd been the fool dancing between the lies. At first, I wanted to tell her everything, just to ruin him, to twist the knife, to watch his little world crumble under the weight of what he built. But the more I thought about her, the less certain I was. What if she wasn't just collateral damage? What if she was complicit? What if she chose not to see? And if that were true, then maybe she and I weren't on opposite sides. Maybe we were both just playing different parts in the same ugly performance. The thought haunted me. I began looking deeper. Old posts, captions, comments. She seemed kind, grounded, not blind, just loyal, maybe too loyal. I wondered how much she'd forgiven already, how many stories she'd swallowed without blinking, and then I felt it, a sharp twist of guilt, because no matter how it happened, I had been part of her betrayal. I had touched her life without ever meeting her. I owed her something, even if it was messy, even if it hurt. I remember the exact moment I decided. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning, no music. Just me at the kitchen table, staring at her profile picture. I whispered it out loud, like a promise to myself. If she doesn't know, she deserves to. And if she does, then I want to see her eyes when I say it. Not for revenge, not even for justice, just for the truth. For whatever truth was still left between two women who had been living in someone else's story. I didn't message her right away. For days, I just hovered. Finger over the send button, thoughts spinning in circles. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. What do I want from this? Revenge felt cheap. Pity felt useless. Closure? Maybe. But even that word started to sound hollow. What I really wanted was to hand her the truth and watch what she did with it. I wanted to look her in the eye and see something. Shock, betrayal, strength, anything real. Because I couldn't tell what was real anymore. So I created a fake account. Nothing dramatic, just clean and anonymous. A first name, no photo, no friends. I stared at the message box for an hour before I wrote it. Hey, I know this is random, and I'm sorry to bring something heavy into your world. But I think we need to talk. Woman to woman. I wouldn't reach out if it wasn't important. I read it 10 times before I hit send. And once I did, my stomach dropped. Like I'd pushed the first domino, and now I couldn't stop what came next. She didn't respond right away. I told myself she wouldn't, that she'd ignore it, block me, maybe even laugh about it. But the next morning, there it was. A reply. Hi, who is this? What's this about? No emojis, no punctuation, just straight to the point. It told me a lot. She wasn't panicking. She was cautious, measured, which somehow made me even more nervous. I typed back, "I think we're connected in a way you don't expect. It's about your husband." There was a pause after that. Hours. I kept checking my phone like a teenager waiting on a first date. And finally, she replied, "Okay, talk to me." 3 words. That was it. But my breath caught in my throat. This was it. The door was open, and suddenly I wasn't sure whether I was stepping into a war or a mirror. We started slow. I didn't dive in with timelines and hotel names. I gave her space, let her lead. I told her I'd been seeing someone, that I didn't know he was married, that I wouldn't be reaching out unless I was sure. She asked questions, calm, polite, almost too polite, like she was taking notes instead of reacting. I could tell she was smart. She never asked for my name, never tried to scare me off, just wanted the facts. And maybe, just maybe, a crack of truth she could feel in her bones. I expected anger or tears, maybe denial, but what I got was grace, measured words, a tone that didn't rise, didn't break. She told me they'd been married for over a decade, had a child, that things hadn't been perfect, but she thought they were honest. And when she said that, I felt the guilt slice through me, clean and sharp. Not because I had ruined anything, but because I had helped him keep it all together. I was the smokescreen, the willing one, even if I hadn't known it. But something shifted between us. Not warmth, not yet, but a kind of recognition. 2 women standing on opposite ends of the same story, staring at the same man and realizing how little they actually knew him. We talked for hours over messages. She told me things I didn't expect, how he'd stopped calling her baby 2 years ago, how he suddenly cared too much about cologne, about his phone always being face down on the table. She'd seen the signs, she just hadn't followed them. I asked her if she wanted to meet, in person. She took a minute, then replied, "Yes. I think I need to see you, and I think you need to see me." It felt like something tectonic had shifted. 2 strangers, tied together by a man who'd made promises in opposite directions, now standing on the edge of something raw, real, and dangerous. And I knew, whatever came next, there was no turning back. We chose a little coffee shop on the edge of town, neutral ground, nothing too loud, nothing too public. I got there early, of course. Sat near the window, stirring my tea until the cup went cold. Every time the door opened, my chest tightened. And then she walked in. Simple dress, no makeup, hair pulled back like she didn't have time for pretense. And when our eyes met, there was no drama, just this strange, silent understanding, like we'd been orbiting each other for months without knowing it. She sat down, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Tell me everything." No fluff, no pleasantries. Just the weight of those 3 words hitting like a challenge and a prayer at once. So I did. I told her about the first night we met, about the gifts, the lies, the way he made me feel seen. I told her about the weekend trips, the notes he left on my mirror, the time he called me his future. And the whole time, she didn't flinch, didn't look away. Just listened, like every word was a piece of the puzzle she'd been building alone. I showed her photos, texts, dates, receipts. Proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that I wasn't just some sad, desperate woman looking for attention. And when I finished, I waited. For her to cry, or scream, or throw her coffee in my face. But she didn't. She set her cup down gently and smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. Like she had finally confirmed what she'd already suspected. And something about that smile made the hairs on my neck rise. Because that's when I realized she wasn't broken. She wasn't blindsided. She was ready. For what? I didn't know yet. But her calm, her poise, the way she held my gaze like she was waiting for me to catch up. It told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't going to end the way I thought it would. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and for a moment said nothing. Just looked at me, not with pity, not even with judgment. Just that strange, unreadable calm. Then she said, "You're not the first." And it hit me like a slap I should have seen coming. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. She didn't wait for me to ask. "I've known for a long time," she continued, her voice smooth as silk, "about all of them, about you." She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She'd been expecting this. She told me the stories like someone describing the weather, detached, factual, unimpressed. There was a waitress 2 years ago, a yoga instructor before that. One woman had even called the house, sobbing. She said she'd comforted that woman. Told her it wasn't her fault. Then poured herself a glass of wine and went to bed like nothing happened. I stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you leave?" I asked. Her answer? "Because I never loved him the way you think I did. I loved the world we built, the illusion, the power." I felt cold, like I'd stepped into the wrong movie. All this time, I thought I was tearing open a secret. I thought I was delivering a truth that would shatter her. But she already had the pieces. She was just watching me fumble with them. She looked at me with something close to amusement and said, "Do you think a man like that could lie to me and get away with it? Please." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready for her strength or her indifference. She wasn't here to cry or collapse. She was here to study me, to understand what kind of woman I was, and maybe, just maybe, to show me what kind of woman she had become. Because in that moment, I realized I hadn't uncovered a secret. I had walked right into a game I didn't even know I was playing. She spoke like someone used to control, each word deliberate, each pause a choice. "You thought you were the secret," she said, lifting her cup to her lips, "but he was mine." I stared at her, heart thudding, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. This wasn't heartbreak. This was strategy. She explained how, years ago, when she found the first trace of betrayal, a receipt, a message, a lipstick smudge, she didn't cry. She watched. She learned. And eventually, she understood that love was never the real currency in their marriage. "People think power looks like shouting," she said, tilting her head slightly. "It doesn't. Power is silence. It's knowing everything and saying nothing, until it's useful." I felt the breath leave my lungs, because she wasn't just surviving this. She was using it. Every affair, every lie, every late night he thought she'd never question. She was collecting it all, banking it. And here I was, thinking I was the explosion. I was barely the match. I asked her if she'd ever considered confronting him, leaving, telling their son. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "He's not worth the chaos, but he's useful, and I know exactly how far I'll let him go before I decide he's not." That shook me more than anything. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so calculated, so far removed from the woman I thought I'd meet. I didn't know whether to respect her or fear her, maybe both. It started to hit me then. I hadn't exposed anything. I'd stepped into something already in motion. I was late to the story, a side character who thought she was the lead. And the worst part? She wanted me there. She welcomed me into her living narrative like she had set the table for this conversation months ago. Maybe even longer. She picked up her phone, scrolled for a second, then turned the screen toward me. A photo. Him, asleep in bed. My bed. Taken weeks ago. I felt the color drain from my face. "You're not the only one who documents things," she said softly. Not smug, just certain. "You see, I've been waiting, watching, letting him dig his own grave." My heart raced, not because I was scared of her, but because I was beginning to understand I had been living in her story all along. And she had been writing every chapter before I even showed up. She told me about the accounts, the emails, the legal loopholes, how she'd been slowly positioning herself for months, maybe years. She wasn't blindsided by his betrayal. She was building leverage with it, using his carelessness like currency. And me? I was just another receipt in her file, a puzzle piece that slid too easily into place. And for a terrifying second, I thought, what else does she know? What else has she planned? She reached into her purse and placed a thin folder on the table. "You wanted truth?" she said, eyes locked on mine. "Here it is. Every woman, every message, every lie he thought he got away with." I didn't touch it. I couldn't. It felt radioactive, like the last gasp of innocence leaving the room. Because now, this wasn't about love or betrayal. This was about control. And I was sitting across from a woman who had never once lost it. I left that cafe shaken. Not just by what I'd heard, but by the quiet realization that I had never been in control. Not of him, not of her, not even of myself. And as I walked to my car, that folder still sealed on the table behind me, I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something I hadn't dared imagine, and she had just invited me into the next act. I couldn't stop replaying her words. The way she smiled when I thought I was delivering a revelation. The way she sat across from me like she'd been waiting for this scene to unfold, waiting for me. I used to think I was the unpredictable element in his life, the wild card, the passion, the secret. But now I saw it clearly. I was a prop, a tool, a means to her end. And the worst part? She never even hated me for it. She appreciated it, like I'd played my role well. It started to click, one memory at a time. The odd timing of our encounters, the way he always seemed to be just available enough, just guilty enough to try harder. I remembered a moment, months ago, when he asked if I ever thought about going public. The flash of panic in his eyes when I joked about posting a photo of us. Back then, I thought it was about guilt. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe he wanted to get caught. Or maybe someone else wanted him to. The folder haunted me. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. Its presence was enough, a reminder that nothing I knew was entirely mine. Even my pain had been anticipated, orchestrated. I started to wonder if she'd nudged him toward me. If she had, in her own way, left the door ajar, set the trap, not because she feared losing him, but because she had everything to gain once he fell. A cleaner divorce, a financial advantage, maybe even custody with the right narrative. And I was the perfect storm in high heels. I wasn't his weakness. I was her weapon. That realization settled into me like ash. Heavy, final. Everything I thought had been accidental, the passion, the betrayal, the collapse, was part of someone else's design. And that woman, the one I thought I was exposing? She had been playing chess while I was learning checkers. Every move I made, every confession, every tear-stained message, she'd already counted the steps. She called me a week later, calm as ever. Like we were old friends checking in after a long vacation. "Just wanted to say thank you," she said. And I froze, phone pressed to my ear like I'd misheard. "You gave me exactly what I needed. More than you know." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my stomach hollow. Because there was no apology in her voice, no empathy, just closure, hers, not mine. She had gotten what she wanted, the evidence, the leverage, the emotional distance. And she had let me do the dirty work. She told me the papers were filed, that he didn't even argue, that she'd made sure her son was protected, the assets secured, her reputation untouched. I asked why she didn't just tell me all this from the start. Why she let me believe I was the one tearing down the lie. She laughed, not cruelly, but like I was still catching up. "Because no one plays their hand too early, and honestly, you were better than I expected. So convincing." That stung more than I expected. Not because I had any love left for him, that was long gone, but because I'd spent so many nights convincing myself that what I felt was real, that I meant something, to someone. But to her, I was a strategy. A smart one, sure, effective, necessary, but never central, never dangerous, just useful. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. I had played my part, with heart, with truth, with pain, and she'd used every drop of it to win. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror later that night and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked broken, but because I looked awake. Finally. And somewhere beneath the shame, there was something else rising. Not rage, not grief. Something colder, cleaner. I wasn't his pawn anymore, but I'd been hers, and now I was done being anyone's. She sent one last message. No subject line, no preamble. Just one sentence. Thank you for playing your part. And beneath that, a photo. Him alone, outside a courthouse, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. No smile, no swagger, just a man stripped down to bone. I stared at the screen, not sure what emotion should come. Satisfaction? Closure? I felt neither, just a strange kind of stillness. Because the story was over. Not with a scream, not with revenge, but with a door quietly closing behind me. I never replied. There was nothing left to say. What could I write that she hadn't already calculated? Every step I'd taken, every confession I'd made had landed exactly where she wanted. I wasn't the heroine. I wasn't even the villain. I was the mirror, held up just long enough to make him flinch and her smile. It wasn't love I'd been caught in. It was strategy, shaped like intimacy, weaponized with care. And now I finally saw it for what it was. Some nights, I still think about that cabin I rented. About the gift I'd picked out so carefully. I wonder what version of me would have been there. Smiling, hopeful, in love with a man who never really existed. That girl's gone now. She burned down with the lies. And what's left is someone sharper. Someone who sees the game before the pieces move. And I can't decide if that's strength or loss. Maybe it's both. But I do know this. I wasn't the other woman, not really. I was a lesson, a tactic. A perfectly placed distraction in someone else's masterpiece. And somewhere, in the cold clarity of it all, I learned how not to be used again. Because in the end, the real mistress wasn't me. It was her. She owned the story. She owned him. And she never even blinked.